birds will return, as the birds always do. When they come home to roost, they'll feast on you.
So you have the artifact this week.
I do. I have been thinking a lot about the media coverage of the two most recent ICE killings, which we talked about in the horrible headlines from last week. And I sort of equivocated a little bit on the racial element of why these things are treated by the media differently. And I do think that video plays a big role in it. But there is video. I mean, there's video of these things. And the more I think about it, the more I think that there is, like, it's trite and obvious to say. It's almost like so glaringly obvious that the debate about it is mostly how on earth can anyone deny it? But there is extremely racialized coverage of news in the United States. And I think it's in part because, well, we have often wondered this question of like, which came first, the audience or the producer of the media content, right? Is the media steering a racist consciousness by the way it presents this stuff, or are the audience expectations driving content producers to produce what the audience wants, right? Who's leading who? And of course, our answer to that question is it's dialectical, and both of those things are happening, but we also agree that the aims of the content producer are primary, right? The politics of the media is controlled by and like directed by their material interest, which is to keep their bosses happy, and that when they do put their thumb on the weight of one side or another, they're going to favor what's in the best interest of their bosses. In this case, I think there's like something else happening too, which is that there's a self-fulfilling prophecy that's happening where we don't think that these are different, but we understand that they are experienced as different in the body politic, and we're not going to pretend otherwise because we're too weathered and grounded in reality, or I don't know, something like that, that like real hard-nosed journalists understand what animates a population, and because of that, they report stories in such a way that they know what will be sensationalist. They understand that the body politic expects black people to die, and that they expect most people to say, well, they probably had it coming. And they think that that's a very different dynamic when someone like Renee Good dies. And I think their belief that that's true is one of the main reasons why people actually react that way, because they're taking their cues from the media more than anything else. And they're seeing the media present these things as like it's obvious that you all think black people are going to be killed. So we experience it as this is less of a story. And then that this cycles through. I think one of the big examples of this in recent memory was like the invasion of Ukraine was explicitly and inexplicitly at different times acknowledged to be something very different than all the wars that you and I have witnessed across our lifetime, partially because it was Europe, which is a big deal, but explicitly because it was white people fighting white people, which was not something that we were used to seeing at all. And that I remember like there was a journalist who like explicitly pointed this out. Like, these are blue-eyed white people that look like Americans' kids. Mm-hmm. Like, how does that change things? And the question was gross, but I think it reflected in the journalists this like what I was talking about, this like unadorned understanding of the audience and human nature, and like a unwillingness to glamorize it. And I think this is why, like, they understand that if they try to present these things as equal, they'll be accused of wokeism, because they agree on some level that like these things are not, whether they should be or shouldn't be, they are not understood to be the same, and that putting their finger on the scale and pretending like they are when they know they aren't will get them accused of some sort of bias, because they also believe that it's biased. They'll say like, a long time ago we were listening to people talk about the NPR newsroom, and they would ask themselves the question, is this to democracy now? Because there's something lacking in integrity about pushing for the world that you think should be, as opposed to like dwelling on the real world.
Yeah, so you're sort of wondering if these media outlets are protecting their brand or their brand identity and the choices they're making about how they cover things, because if they were to cover things in a way that was more honestly materially true about what's going on, that would have a progressive slant, and that would demean their brand. That would people would question their credibility.
Well, it's a question of not what is true, but what is newsworthy. And I think they have hypnotized themselves into believing that what is newsworthy is what everyone assumes it is without being able to say it is, which is like white people we don't expect to get killed. And when they are killed, we presume innocence. And when black and brown people are killed, we expect that they will die and we presume guilt.
Yeah. I mean, there was a couple of like media analyses done around the coverage comparing the war in Gaza to the war in Ukraine, especially the early coverage, like the first 100 days. And there was an immense double standard about how the deaths were covered. In particular, I remember reading about one that referring to children dying, it was double in the first 100 days of Ukraine, double the mentions versus in Gaza, which is really absurd because the child deaths in Gaza are at an unprecedented scale.
Yeah.
So to be mentioning them 100% less than in the Ukrainian war, where there has been civilian death, but minimal civilian death, certainly minimal civilian death of children, it gives you like I don't know. Who's the audience for that? I wasn't like following the first 100 days of that war. Like I'm surprised. Like I get the bias. But I'm surprised that the media, by your argument, the media is so committed to producing content with that bias. It's much less interesting because it's not as true.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Gaza, I think it was clear that two things were happening. One is the level of fraught politicalness of it was making them be very, very conscious of what they were producing. I think this is especially true of the New York Times. It's like we need to have 100,000 meetings about the way that we talk about
how
things,
to use the passive voice most often.
When do you use the passive voice? When do you don't? Right. Who do you refer? Like, it's not the health ministry, it's the Hamas led. Like, all these things you had to agree upon is the standardized language so that the editors could have a uniformity approach to it. And that was partly because of the politicization and partly because the paper had an agenda that it wanted to push. And I guess the journalists just kind of do what they're told. But I think they also expect that their audience was looking for them to, like, contextualize it using those kinds of tricks. Like, how important should I consider this to be? Well, it's important, but they're not Ukrainians, right? They're not Europeans. And that means something different. And it does. I mean, it's significant when something closer to the imperial center happens for a lot of reasons. And it's significant not just to white readers of the New York Times in the United States, but people all over the world. So there is a quality that's different to that. But they're not able to engage with that, like the actual material of that. So anyway, I have selected a artifact for us talking about the racism and the coverage of the ICE killings. This is Aja Arnold writing The Objective. Reporting on ICE killings follows a long history of normalizing state violence. This was published at the end of April, but I think given the new killings, I wanted to take a moment to just reflect upon how some of these dynamics are playing out in real time. So here we go. Mainstream coverage of Renee Good, Alex Preddy, and Keith Porter's killings show how anti-black news standards desensitize communities to state violence. I'm going to skip a little bit at the beginning because it's simply just sort of restating what happened in Minneapolis. It wasn't until after the murders of Good and Preddy, both white citizens, that people across the country heard the name Keith Porter Jr., a black 43-year-old father of two who was shot and killed by an off-duty ICE officer, Brian Palacios, on New Year's Eve in Los Angeles. Palacios had been accused of making racist remarks about black people and Latinos, according to court records. Further details of Palacios' identity and employment for ICE are unknown. Although the officers involved in these shootings have had years of experience working on immigration raids, some mainstream media outlets and public discourse have repeated the narrative that these killings are the result of, quote, poorly trained and, quote, inexperienced agents, a trend that interrupting criminalism journalism fellow and independent journalist Louis Raven Wallace says U.S. newsrooms have long perpetuated around policing, one that removes responsibility from police and continues the cycle of state violence. You might say this is a narrative that we perpetuated.
Right. So I'm actually already seeing this narrative get like overplayed in the media for the Biddeford, Maine shooting, and it does seem like that ICE officer was a more recent recruit. Although we should fact check this, because I've seen multiple like headlines where it's like recent recruit, and then I've seen some counter arguments that he's been involved in law enforcement for years. But I do think there's a very quick jump to talk about these people as if they are new to the job or yahoos or poorly trained. In fact, one of the first Instagram videos I saw after the shooting, the killing in Maine, was the Jolly Good Ginger, who is like a leftist activist who shows up to hotspots, and he immediately was starting to like bitch about the techniques of the law enforcement officers. He's one of these guys where it's like, this is all wrong. I think he meant to be ex-military. This is not how you do it. And it's like, that is not the point. Their lack of training, or their lack of experience, or their preponderance of training and experience is not the argument. And to pretend that this is sort of like a recent development, these are recent problems because of maybe an inept Trump administration with poor training, and unleashing the dogs. That's ahistorical, and it's not true. And I think we do sometimes fall into it. We fall into that a little bit.
I mean,
too.
we want to make a big deal about like the recent fascist uprise, and there is something like I think uniquely fascist about like the recruiting methods and like what they're trying to build. But like, it is the case that Trump kind of occupies the same role in like U.S. fascism that Netanyahu does in Israel, which is like, we have always been doing these things, but we've been doing them in this professional, unembarrassing, like put together, technocratically competent way. And we've been doing it that way so you all won't get mad at us, right? And you're not really mad that it's happening. You're mad that you have to look at it because it's so embarrassingly sloppy and excessive and indulgent. And our job now is to like paint this as like a temporary problem that's been caused by like the way that it's being administrated and not the thing itself. ICE is not the problem. It's Trump and then what they're turning ICE into, and like both things are problems.
Yeah, both
ICE
things
was
are
always a
both
problem,
things are true.
and
Yeah,
how Trump is. I mean, it's a problem that this was there for him to use in this way, and how he's using it is, I guess, objectively worse than how it has been used in the past.
well, maybe, but like
it was still really bad.
yeah, it's a bipartisan. It's been a long bipartisan commitment to like border enforcement and racist border enforcement. And right now it's showing up in a particular way. And I guess you could say like maybe objectively the violence is higher, but the violence is pretty high when you're enforcing borders in 100-degree heat in Texas, and causing people to die, like children and women to die in the heat because of the decisions they're willing to make to try to get over the border, whether it's in the back of a truck or in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
And like you could say that's less direct violence, but it's not really.
Yeah.
This is not really less direct violence.
No.
So I don't know that I'm ready to make the argument that the violence is equal at this moment in time, but like it is a long-standing bipartisan project. And the other thing is that this group of our population of men who are willing and want to take these jobs and are willing and participants in shooting people dead at a traffic stop, that is not a new invention. That's not like Trump created this out of like thin air.
Yeah.
This has been an existing part of our population for a very long time that has been variably used by the politicians and the people in power. Trump is is certainly like tapping into it in a certain way, and I do think it's a dialectic of how much he creates it and how much he's responding to it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not like a Republican alone creation. That's a creation of that's a reflection of the United States and the culture of the United States and the politics of the United States and the economics of the United States. That's why we have those people.
Yeah. I think part of the dynamic here is that like just like corruption was sort of a acceptable secondary part of the system that kind of made the main parts of the system function, and now that corruption is sort of the point.
Right.
Like the excesses of the system are becoming more and more central and like the actual point of the system is becoming secondary. In this case, like you had a racialized caste system in the United States that the police enforce
forever, literally forever. That is
the
how it
beginning of the
exists.
police,
Yeah.
right.
Since the
And-
beginning of the police, since the beginning of immigration policy, since the beginning of figuring out how rights will work. I mean, it's like it's baked into the whole operation.
That's right. And like excessive violence was a predictable excess of a system that was built around that, but it wasn't the point of it. And then you have people like Hegseth and Trump and Stephen Miller come in, and what they want is they want violence that will lead to the rebirth of the nation in front of your face, right? That the violence itself becomes not an acceptable excess of that system, one that we are perfectly happy with, and in fact can use to our advantage, but is not the central point of it. Now becomes that's what we want to see. We want to see people being hurt in the streets.
Yep.
We want it on the news media. We want it in your face. And I think that's the qualitative difference here.
Speaking of that, and I don't think we discussed this explicitly in the last episode. I think we just discussed it with our kids at the dinner table. But following the 2 deaths, and there's since been a 3rd death, a man was struck on the highway by a truck fleeing ice in St. Augustine, Florida. And I consider that to be in the same bucket, honestly. But following the 2 deaths related to the traffic stops, DHS said stop traffic stops. Like, do your other operations, but you're not going to do motor vehicle stops.
Yeah.
Trump came out today, July 15th, and said, absolutely do not stop traffic stops. We are not going to be limited to how we do this work.
Oh, wow.
So give you a taste of the sort of the violence is the point.
Yeah.
That's exactly what that looks like.
He recognizes that like
this is not the moment to back off the violence.
Right. Like you bring in Mark Wayne Mullen because he was able to de-escalate by returning to like a much more lib-coded type technocratic competence where we're quietly pulling as many people as we can without really giving people a chance to get that mad about it and without rubbing it in their face. And Trump like doesn't understand that because he doesn't care how many immigrants are in the country.
Well, he
cares about a media narrative.
He's also is very, very tuned in to the media and his brand. And I think it probably felt off brand to be pulling back from murdering people in the streets.
Right. This is one of the differences between liberalism and fascism is liberalism is very competent about gauging the pressures in society and finding a middle way through that like minimizes unrest and instability, and fascism has no tolerance for that. Fascism is seeking instability and seeking to like maximize and capitalize on instability. And it makes no sense for someone like Trump. Capitulation to pressure from activists and organizers is weakness, which will lead to more activism and organizing. And he's wrong. It's one of the reasons you want more like as competent a revolutionary as Lenin was, the best friend he had was Tsar Nicholas because he had the same attitude of like escalating instead of de-escalating and just poor management of like the social forces that led to all these opportunities to take advantage of.
Yeah. I mean, they weren't friends. They were more allies. they were more achieving the same results together.
Yeah.
But I don't think
dance partner, if you will.
I don't think a dance partner, but with no dinner. They never dined.
Back to the article. Quote, mainstream media does a lot of unspoken work in normalizing certain kinds of death and making other kinds of death exceptional and remarkable, Wallace said. Deaths caused by poverty, hunger, ICE detention, these have been normalized by mainstream media, while Alex Preddy and Renee Good in particular have been treated by the media as exceptional deaths.
That's just a good parallel to consider how little you know about deaths in ICE detention and how much you know about the sort of in the street deaths.
I know everything. I mean, I know the moment he was disarmed. I know how many people were shooting at him. Like, you know everything about these
and
things.
Just think about what that means. Like, think about what death in detention means. Like, in our horrifying prison industrial complex, it is not actually expected for prisoners to die of treatable things.
Yeah.
That is, like, prisons are horrible in the United States. And it would be I mean, people do not get good health care, and they do probably die at a higher rate of things, and they do die at a higher rate of sort of longer term health conditions that cannot be treated well in prison, but they are not dying of a toothache, which can be treated with antibiotics. The level of violence and dehumanization, the conditions within ICE detention facilities, and the death numbers are horrifying.
Yeah.
These are things that, like, the appropriate words to use are concentration camps, and that is not covered because it's sort of like, oh, detaining people, kidnapping them, putting them behind closed doors, that is not a type of violence that we need to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a lot to do with the people. This is a dehumanized group of people. They're non-English speakers. They're very poor. They don't have social networks that we are aware, like, white people are aware of.
And the valence of citizen or not citizen has become, like, the Trump movement has made that carry a lot more weight, and the media has responded to that.
Yeah. And I think it's very important that Scheinbaum in Mexico is not just pressing charges about the deaths by firearm at a vehicle, but is looking at there's 16 Mexican citizens that have been killed in ICE detention, according to Mexico, in the last year. The fact that
we know of.
The fact that that's not, I mean, this is how fascism works. This is how you this is how you descend into Nazi Germany. The fact that it's not regular headlines, everyday headlines, that this is what's happening to people in detention centers, that there's thousands and thousands of people who were kidnapped out of their homes and wrongfully detained and have no access to the correct legal counsel, let alone, like, they have nothing. And you see what? Well, you get the occasional footnote of, like, oh yeah, these are the deaths by ICE. And also, do you know there's 35 more?
Yeah.
Like, it's literally just not, it's not present in our lives. And this is also how this is why you get, like, people not understanding the violence of capitalism shows up in, like, death because of poverty, or the violence of border enforcement shows up in people dying on their way to get across the border. I mean, the projects are much larger, and the violence is constant, and the media apparatus is not supposed to make you aware of that. That's like the low hum of violence.
Yeah.
That's the acceptable violence.
Right. That's what I mean by, like, it's true, but it's not newsworthy, because everyone knows it and nobody cares.
Well, you say everyone knows it. You know it. And you can have a conversation with people and explain it to them, and they'd be like, oh, I'm not so surprised that's true. But I think most people don't really know it.
Okay.
They don't, they're the knowledge of the levels of violence that are, like, constant in people's lives and that we do not talk about. I don't think people know about.
Yeah.
I mean, do people know you can't get antibiotics in an ICE detention center, like, for weeks on end?
Yeah.
Do people know
Probably
that?
not. Probably not. It's just like, I think I guess I'm empathizing with the journalist in this case, though, because I expect people to have the reaction, oh my gosh. Well, yeah, though. I mean,
but the journalist's job is not to make the audience engage with the contents. That's not a journalist's job.
well,
It's not.
I mean, it depends. It depends on how you understand. I mean, their job is to get clicks for advertisers.
That is their journalist's job. That is what has happened. But, like, I don't think that's what journalism is.
Yeah.
Not in the, like, we need freedom of press in order to have a democracy. That's not what journalism is.
Yeah. I mean, the journalist is also not, their job is not to tell you to care about something that they don't think you care about. That's also not
Their job is also not to not cover things because they think people don't care about them.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, if you go through and catalog sort and catalog the types of content that's being pushed onto the New York Times, I'm sure that they're not actually saying that much new. They're just recycling headlines. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we're like, oh, you're going to get tired of ICE detention deaths. I mean, how many times do we have to have a ceasefire headline with no content? I mean, you get a headline and they're like, yeah, Strait of Hormuz is closed. Like, they're not like they're producing, like, new and exciting content and they're like, well, we just don't have room to talk about ICE detention deaths again because it's an old story. Like, they're not saying anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not contributing much at all.
Yeah, they're not putting it in front of your face and giving you a chance to. I think that's what I sort of think about the self-fulfilling prophecy, is they're not putting it in your face 24 hours a day for 3 days straight and see if you care about it.
Yeah.
They're deciding which things you are going to and not care about ahead of time, and it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy.
So I keep mentioning the death by toothache, but there was a immigrant, I believe a Haitian immigrant, who went into ICE detention healthy and died because of a toothache.
For abscess on their gums, right?
Mm-hmm. And, this person has family members and coworkers and people that saw him in detention and people that work in that detention center, potentially even as like prison guards. All those people could be interviewed by journalists. We could have a news story every day about who this man was.
Yeah. His life. Yeah. His
There's
family.
plenty of
his
content
children.
that you can
Yeah.
manufacture around this.
Yeah. But the response from the defenders of it will not be he deserved it or he did something wrong. It'll be simply, this is a person who's nothing like you. And you should not consider this to be evidence that something like this could happen to you because you're nothing like this man. May as well be someone who lives across the world and interacting with people that you don't know. Because
what is that poem? First they came for the socialists.
Right. I mean, it works. I mean, they did the same shit to Good. Is they tried to paint her
she's a lesbian,
very different than you,
a
and
poet.
Therefore you don't have to worry about this happening to you or people you know.
Yeah, I'm not a poet, so I definitely couldn't be shot by an ICE.
Right. I mean, we're ridiculous. They were very heavy-handed about that too. Of like, this is not a normal person. This was a poet.
This person was like Shakespeare. I mean, can you imagine?
So while Wallace acknowledges that there are some ways in which Good and Preddy's death are exceptional, he says that the way they've largely been reported on, quote, obscures the way ICE has been operating as a death machine in communities already. Journalists, researchers, and media justice organizers say this approach is rooted in journalism norms linked to the anti-black foundation of U.S. migration and media systems, and say more funding and interest in journalism that rejects these norms is needed. I'm going to skip through. There's an interesting discourse about racism and deportation orders. I'm going to skip, though, to the journalism part. Several organizations have also articulated how these through lines are echoed in the development of U.S. journalism and media systems. Among them is Media 2070, launched in 2020, which advocates for media reparations to address journalism's historical and ongoing harm to Black communities. And his team has argued that the industry doesn't financially benefit from an end to ICE, human trafficking, or U.S. policing. Quote, racism has been good for business for too many big media companies for far too long, the Media 2070 authors wrote in their launch essay. Large media companies have little incentive to advance or achieve racial equity in their operations, since it would force them to dismantle the white racial hierarchy that exists in their own newsrooms. This is why media reparations are crucial. I don't know about that. I mean,
yeah, I don't know about that.
I think it's overplayed, maybe a little bit on purpose, the role of like the who is doing it versus like the why and how. And I guess in this context, are media reparations like explicit DEI programs to get more like Black and brown journalists? Or are they talking about like making the New York Times make payments to like Detroit's water grid or something?
I haven't the slightest idea. But I don't think the racism of the media coverage has much at all to do with the demographics or the racism in the newsroom, other than the fact that both are a result of the society we live in.
Right.
It's not like the cause and effect is not. It's not like, oh, we'd have more if we have more Black women journalists, we would be covering this better.
Yeah.
I mean, at least I don't subscribe to that.
I mean, the best way, I mean, according to like the liberal manager approach, like the woke liberal manager approach to this problem, the best thing to do is put a Black or brown person in charge of a newsroom, because they can speak with a lot more, right, and they can continue to do exactly the same things, and you can't to like.
What do you mean we don't talk about Palestinian children dying? There's a Muslim editor on our international wire.
Yeah, or like, how dare you accuse me of racism? Do you know what my personal experiences are, right?
Yeah,
that's not to say that. I'm sure that also there's a lot of progressive Black and brown people who've been prevented from being journalists, but that's another story.
Right. Well, that's because we live in a racist society.
Right.
And once they were into something like the New York Times newsroom, they're not going to change what we're talking about individually.
Right.
So
they're also going to punish those journalists if they don't get with the program, regardless of where they come from and what their actual beliefs are.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, then CBS chairman and CEO Les Moonves openly rooted for Trump's racist presidential campaign, saying, quote, it may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. The money's rolling in. This is going to be a very good year for us.
Turned out it was better for Barry Weiss than Les Moonves.
It's terrible thing to say. It's a terrible thing to say, but bring it, Donald. Go ahead. Keep going. Moonves later departed CBS in 2018 after being accused of, you're never going to guess.
Oh,
what it
wait.
is.
Sexual assault.
Sexual misconduct. While Pretty and Good received global...
With a name like Les Moonves.
Keep going, Moonves. The sexual misconduct allegations are really good for business.
Les the Pest is what we call him in the newsroom.
God. I mean, are all of these guys?
Yes. You know, the media attracts scoundrels and predators.
Gross. While Pretty and Good received global news attention, that same investigative and critical news focus has not been afforded to non-white people, particularly black people killed by police throughout history, which media scholars like Joseph Torres, part of the Media 2070 team, say is linked to the foundational anti-blackness in the development of the U.S. and its media systems. The United States is a settler colonial nation, Torres said. When it comes to the enslavement of black folks and the westward expansion of the genocide of indigenous people in this country, these hierarchies were necessary for the political project of America. So, like anything, you need a narrative, and when you dehumanize people, it results in policies. I think this is true, and one of the reasons why, like, one of the main reasons that the United States does not have like this history of protest and a civil unrest that like France has, for example, is because it's so easy to like regiment American society into like racial castes and convince certain groups that they are immune from like falling to below a certain level, because that's the lot of a different people, and they just don't have these racial I mean, maybe increasingly they have them in Europe, but like they have like social class, which there was a real revolution against. And I think there's still a robust sort of understanding of like class as an inherited trait, as something to struggle against. In the United States, like we have never had a racial reckoning, really. We had like slavery is bad, but we never really had slavery is bad and you targeted a particular group of people and that has to stop. It sort of was like those group of people are still not deserving of being treated the same way. Like even Abraham Lincoln didn't think that they were equal to white people. Not really. And like this is why like racism and capitalism are like best friends. Like the capitalism in the United States is so much more stable and so much more capable of exploiting all workers, white workers, black workers, brown workers, because of these tiered trick that they play.
And you think that's particular to the U.S.?
I think it's particular to the United States. I mean, there's nowhere in the world that has like majority minority like population. Nowhere in the first world has that.
Yeah, but it's not particular to the U.S. The capitalism racism partnership is not particular to the U.S.
No, it's not.
So I guess I'm wondering what you're seeing as specifically different.
It's nowhere as advantageous as it has been in the United States.
And that's not because we're just the imperial center, or we are the imperial center because it's been so advantageous.
I'm not sure I would be willing to say something that strong, but it certainly helped.
Yeah.
I mean, the population of Jews in Germany before the Holocaust was roughly the population of trans people in the United States today. Like if you had a Jewish population that was like 30% of the population, and instead of like an extermination, it was like a underclass that regular Germans could accept, you have to wonder if fascism in Germany would have been much, much more stable and robust than it turned out to be.
Yeah. I do think they're thinking of the racialized caste system in the United States, the particularities of it being so effective actually being what has allowed the U.S. to become an ascendant imperial power, I think is probably the way to think about it. That slavery was so materially effective for this colonial outpost, and then the maintenance of the racialized caste system, and then going into a world war and being conveniently not located near the war. I think probably the combination of things probably did allow for the capitalist project to be so successful.
Yeah. I mean, you had slavery, where obviously the nation's wealth was built upon slavery. But then what you had was the abolition of slavery and the mass exodus of black workers to the North, which was the real impulse behind the Civil War. Was we cannot have all of this productive workforce trapped in chattel slavery,
right? Because
we have way more money to be made by moving these to factories and becoming an industrialized country. And they could work with white workers in the North, but how much more convenient is it? What conditions do you accept? Like today, like the thought of working in like as a fry cook is horrifying to me. And the reason for that is less because it's a fry cook and more because I understand the lives that those people are forced to live, right? And you have to, in order to avoid a conversation about reforming that, so it's like a job that any person would be able to tolerate, you have to say, well, it would have to be very strange circumstances for you to have to take that job. We have other people who have no choice to take that job, so you don't have to worry.
Well, yeah, it's a very large underclass, and it's a category that's largely been unchanged for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
There are caste systems that have similar like social impact. Like the caste system in India has like significant social and economic impact.
Mm-hmm.
But it differs in that it's less unnamed and also has like a whole like it has a set of storytelling around it, like religious storytelling around it. That also means that like it's named and the stories told about it have shifted over time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the United States, it's largely unnamed and the stories have not shifted. Like you literally can like trace it from slavery to Jim Crow to like mass incarceration. And you can't, and there's not like, oh, that's an outdated Hindu idea about caste. Like, it's not like these are our ideas about these people in like a very consistent way.
Yeah. But in both cases, the existence of the caste system is bolstered by an ideology, which is the mythology, in our case, that there is a meritocracy, that anyone born in this country can achieve great things if they make the right choices. And therefore, you ought to blame people for the position they're in, / they ought to blame themselves for the position they're in. If they wanted something better, they would have gotten it. Or if they deserved something better, they would have gotten it. And they've had to come up with this whole unfalsifiable mythology because you're not supposed to have, like, the whole point of it was you weren't supposed to have social classes anymore. But of course they discovered in practice that it was impossible for the masters to have what they wanted unless there was a social class system.
Who said we weren't supposed to have social classes anymore?
The capitalist middle class, quote unquote, bourgeois rebellion against the king was you were not supposed to be born into a station. You're supposed to be free to find a station that was appropriate to you as an individual.
But and
that was very important to them because there were things that they were denied which they felt that they deserved.
Yeah, but 2 notes on that. They did not necessarily believe that all humans were granted that. So there's different categories of people who are granted that. And they did believe there'd be stations.
But stations that you deserve.
Yes.
Yeah. But this is the point I'm making is if you have a situation where people think that they deserve what they can get, you have a social collapse. You have to convince certain people that could never happen to them regardless of what they do. And they have to have other people expect that regardless of what they do, they will end up here.
Yes.
You have to have that component. You cannot just let pure meritocracy take hold because it creates too much like panic and instability. And like if you knew that like I might be a C student who is never going to be trusted with that much authority, then I'm going to have a vested interest in what that low-level job looks like, how much they get paid, the way they get treated, what benefits they have. But if I can say to myself, like, regardless of what I do, I know I'm never going to be a fry cook. Like, I'll just be unemployed before I'll be a fry cook. Then the only people who have a vested interest in what that, like, existence look like are the people who are relegated to it.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to deal with that. They had to deal with, like, we want a pure meritocracy. We don't believe all people deserve to be leaders, but we do believe all people deserve that shot. And then they had to have this whole thing about, like, are black people? When we talk about people, do we mean them? Do we mean women? Do we mean Native American people? Blah, blah, blah. But putting all that aside, they still had to have this, like, how do we have people locked into their station while maintain this fiction of we believe in meritocracy? And race was the way to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. It's absolutely a solidarity killer. If you could end up, this is like, who's it, John Rawls? If you could end up the justice.
The veil.
If you could,
yeah.
If you are you willing to roll the dice that you could literally be born into any body of the 8 billion people on Earth, and you quickly say to yourself, "Oh God, no," because we live in a horrifying world where the vast majority of people are living very challenging lives, and you wouldn't take that. And that's an indicator that we're not living in a very just world, and that you could make more just decisions. Mm-hmm. But if you believe that it's not a roll of the dice, you're somewhat fixed, or you're at least protected from
Yeah.
certain things, and other people are stuck, mostly stuck in the underclass, then yeah, it's not
Yeah.
going to make you particularly invested in making it better. I do think that this also relates to something we've talked about, or I've written about, the crisis of the identity in the second modernity, where there was a breaking down of these very traditional roles and norms that did give people sort of relatively stable station. Like, you're born in this village, your father makes shoes, you make shoes. Like the pre-industrialization sort of ways that societies were organized, your identity was extremely fixed. It was basically predestined. You are like a woman in a Dutch village. Like, you're not going to like have very much freedom as to what happens. And then industrialization happens and urbanization happens, and there's a breakdown of some of these traditional norms, and there's like this promise of that being freedom, but it's all under capitalism, caveat. But like it did require, it creates a level of like crisis and instability for humans to figure out what their identities are.
Yeah.
And so there's many mechanisms that swoop in to deal with that, like consumerism and other sort of like like less traditional roles and more like social roles. And also like there remains pretty strong anchors. Like you are probably not going to slip from the upper middle class to the underclass. Like it's like there's a crisis of the crisis of modernity and the what is my identity, but there's also like a limited amount of slippage.
Right. I was just thinking about the veil of ignorance, but they're like, now, how would you feel about this world if you were guaranteed to be born white?
Still wouldn't take that bet.
A big component of this too is like, this is all true, and white people's standard of living, white workers' standard of living, by and large, is a lot worse than it would have been if they had a different attitude about this. But I wanted to say
the white workers had a different attitude about this.
Yeah, white workers had a different attitude about this. One of the things that you could say about like our current predicament is how many sons of like successful shoemakers and bakers and barbers went to college to become upper middle class professionals when they should have just
stayed shoemakers.
Right. And like you had this like overwhelming number of people who descended upon universities because it was the prescribed way out of the working class or like the lower middle class. And you had this explosion of college debt because what wouldn't you pay for a shot at getting out of having to like do one of these jobs your whole life? And now you have a bunch of people whose like expectations are way too high for what society can offer.
That was entirely a marketing ploy to appeal to people's identity insecurity about class mobility. And they said, look at all these schmucks that are worried about this and want to have a different access and different identity. We can just sell them a lifetime of debt.
Yep.
The economy can't support them as professionals.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we probably can't support them as working class people, but we can certainly take their debt, bundle it up, and resell it.
Yeah. And like it's true that millennials are downwardly mobile, but maybe more damning is they're downwardly mobile from where they expected to be, not where their parents might have been in similar circumstances. Like they expected to, if they did all the right things, there would be all this stuff for them. And there's just not. It's just not there. No. The world needs more fry cooks than it needs CEOs. Like that's just the way it is. And it doesn't matter how many people go to college. It doesn't change that fundamental fact that like work at some point, someone's gonna have to do some work. You can't just have an entire society of bureaucrats who sit around and enjoy the proceeds from the people doing the work. You need people to do the work.
Well, those people will still enjoy the proceeds, though. We're just taking away like research scientist jobs and
your powers will fade.
Done and dusted.
Done and dusted.
Your powers will fade as you grow old. Your powers will fade as you grow old. You're on the make, and you don't do regret. You're always out for what you can get. You think like a snake, and you ooze like a snail. Let the trail go cold as you swallow your tail. With your low rent skills and your heart of flint, telling your tales that are unfit to print. You're all weasel woods, backed up by the boots, obsessed like the rest, with a promise of loot. Your pies will fade as you grow old. Your pies will fade as you grow old. Your pies will fade as you grow old. Your pies will fade as you grow old.
I love you.